Who's got a really good plant story? No drug stories. So we're continuing in the exploration of power and magic. And one of the largest sources of power in magic, going back into prehistory, are plants. And it's really not that hard. As soon as you think about magic or sorcery, I mean, what's maybe the first thing you might think of is like a wizard, right? Or a witch. But then pretty close after that, there's like a potion or a spell or a wand, which is a plant. We're going to talk about that, right? So plants feature very prominently in the magical world. They have a big role that they play. They unlock things within the magician themselves, and they also serve as carriers for the magic, right? So you don't have to do it, you can just let the plant do it. So much easier. Everybody's lazy, right? They look for little helpers everywhere. So plants are kind of like magicians' helpers. And if you look back into the history of it, you can see, I know you guys, some of you guys that have been to some of my other lectures remember what my definition of magic is. Anybody? No? Bad students. Magic is when you open your perception to see things that are in reality, but you're just including more of the reality in your perception, right? That's what magic is. Like when you can see a rainbow, right? But a magician can see the rainbow without even the rain or the sun helping him out, right? Because the rainbow is always there. So plants aid in magic because they can increase our perception to make us be able to see more of reality. And I always love including the rainbow thing because plants take advantage of way more of the spectrum than we do. Like you guys know all those nature shows where you see like how the plants use all the ultraviolet light to help with like insects and stuff like that? They already see it. Plants see and know everything. They know so much, they can perceive so much more than we do. And we're so dumb because we'll look at plants and we think like they don't have feelings or maybe they're not even alive. But actually their sensory perception systems can perceive way more than our eyeballs and our ears and our noses. So they're way more highly developed sensory systems than we are, right? And I mean, a good way to just get a hands-on feeling of that, how many of you guys have ever been stung by a nettle? Yeah? It's pretty crazy, right? You just touch it and chemicals are released into your skin and you feel a sensation, right? How would a plant, right, that's just hanging out in the dirt, make something that causes a response in your skin on your body? Like how would a plant know, I'm going to make this because it's going to mess with that thing's skin? How does it even know there's things with skin that can mess with it? Right? That's what I'm talking about. Like think about that. How would a plant make that response? It would have to be conscious of the fact that there's things walking around with skin on them that this chemical can then irritate. That's a very conscious, specific action to make in retaliation. It means not only are they conscious, there's other beings other than themselves that can mess with them. Let's say you're a nettle in the forest, right? You've been in the forest for years. You might not even ever come into contact with any other critter, right? And yet your system is going to generate this thing because somewhere in your plant consciousness, you know that there's other things wrapped in skin that could maybe mess with you. So you have this defense mechanism in order to protect you against that. Specific conscious behavior, right? Plants are totally nuts. So people using plants for magic means that we become conscious of some of their magical abilities. So we're doing okay. We're not quite as good as plants. But somehow we become conscious that plants have some kind of crazy thing going on, right? Some early shaman saw a plant and he's like, that can do some crazy stuff, so I'm going to take it and cure this disease. But how did the shamans know, how did they become conscious that the plants even had that capacity, right? You guys ever ask people that like know about medicine and stuff like that, how do you know what drug is good for what? And then they'll tell you, well, you test it in the labs. You guys think that's true? You guys think they test stuff in the labs and that's how they figure stuff out? You guys know how many like hundreds of millions of species of plants there are? You think they could just test it in the lab and find out if it does stuff? Not really. There is some other method of communication with plants. And there is a specific intimate relationship between people and plants, and animals and plants, and everything and plants. Right? There's a relationship where things can get communicated back and forth. And that's how we figure out all of the different magical capabilities and possibilities for plants and how they work. Some of the first magical treaties, you guys know what those were, like when they wrote down like magical stuff? Yeah? Obviously magic has been around for a long time, but some of the earliest ones that they wrote down came out of Egypt, right? They have all those papyri written on the scrolls. Really, you could argue, was it Sumeria, was it Egypt, was it China with the I Ching? You can get into a lot of debates, but basically the earliest writings that we have come in that general area, right? And you guys know what the first writings they wrote about were? There was like the Law of Hammurabi, right? And then after that, it's all magical stuff. There's the Eber's Papyrus, all those old papyri from Egypt, the Book of the Dead. Those are all magic and spells. That's what people were writing about.
What year was that?
That's like 3000 BC, 3500 BC, around then. That's when we start to get language emerging. And they're all talking about magic. And in the Eber's Papyrus, it's all kinds of plant magic. The first magic that they're talking about are potions, spells, and it's almost all having to do with plants and planets. It's all in those first early descriptions. And they'll use, basically you can break it down, plants get used in magic for either healing diseases, making poisons to kill people, right? Super popular. People still make poisons out of plants to kill people all the time. They would use plants to give spells power, because a plant will have all its power. So you want to do a spell and make something happen, you just use the plant that can do that thing, right? They use it to induce an altered state of consciousness, right? Change you on the inside so that you can see everything that the plant sees, right? If you guys think your consciousness is altered when you ingest a plant, what do you think that plant's consciousness is all the time? You guys think if you ingest DMT from a plant, what do you think that DMT plant is like all the time? Right? You're just taking it for like a second. The plant that contains that chemical, that's its like everyday life. It's like that all the time. It's waiting for you to catch up. Right? It's like the dolphins that are like waiting for us to get smart enough to talk to them. That's what they're doing. They hang out with us because they're like, sooner or later, they're going to figure this out, and then we can talk to them. That's the only reason they hang out, you know. Same with plants. I kind of feel like plants are like, hey, could you just eat me, please, so that you can figure this out? And we can like get to a higher state of evolution where you can all hang out, you know? I really kind of feel like that's what's going on. And when we think about plants, of course we have to really kind of get into like, okay, well, what exactly is a plant and what's going on there? I wanted to do like a little quick and dirty little breakdown of kind of the classifications of life. You guys remember your 6th grade biology class where they do all the kingdom, phylum, blah-de-blah-dim stuff, right? So the way it works is they have like life, and they classify things that are alive, which is firstly not correct because they don't include rocks in there. They don't have crystals. It's all cellular life in their definition, right? So you got life, and then they break it into eukaryotes and prokaryotes, right? 2 kinds of cells. And then there's 6 kingdoms. You guys know what those are? Who's a geek? Come on. We got animals, we got plants, we got fungus. Fungus aren't animals or plants. Isn't that crazy? Fungus are crazy.
There's 2 kinds of plants.
There's the protists, right, which are like the single cell plankton kind of stuff. And then there's 2 kinds of bacteria, the archaea and the eukarya. Eukarya is like bacteria, like you guys all know. Bacteria aren't animals or plants either. There's something else. That's crazy too. You have tons of bacteria living in you, but they're not animals. They're not plants. What are they? They're bacteria. Something different than anything else that's in your body. Right? How can that live in you that you are an animal? It's weird to me. And then there's the archaea bacteria. Do you guys know what those guys are? They had to make that kingdom later because those are the guys that live in the bottoms of volcanoes. You guys remember reading about those guys? Okay, so if you don't know, there's guys that live in the bottoms of volcanoes. Right? Those are the archaea bacteria. And they live in these intensely unfriendly, unlivable environments, like volcanoes in the middle of ice. So they had to make this new kingdom because they're like, how can anything live in here? This is crazy. They're not bacteria, they're not plants, they're not animals, they're this thing. So they just kind of made up another name, but they can't really explain how or why they exist. And I'm just going to say, scientists will say there's no life on other planets because it's inhospitable for life, but there's things that live in the bottom of a volcano. Okay? What are like other planets, like Mars? You guys know, like Mars is like a volcano. Do you guys really think there's not stuff that lives there? There's stuff that lives there on our planet. Stupid, right? It's stupid. So, even though they break all these guys up into different parts, bacteria live inside of you, which is an animal. So do you think there's a really big difference? What's the difference? Inside of your cell are the mitochondria, right? And those are a lot like bacteria. So it's not as separate as you guys might think. And one of my favorite things to illustrate that point, this is really going to mess you guys up a little bit maybe. What do you think the difference is between animals and plants? Everybody kind of knows this, right? Anybody?
I feel like animals can kind of walk around and plants are like stuck.
That's true.
Plants photosynthesize
Yeah.
from the sun.
Photosynthesis, right? Photosynthesis. Photosynthesis means they make their own food from the light. Plants eat light. We eat things that eat light. We eat things that eat things that eat light. Everything comes from light. Plants exist because they eat light. And that's what they do. And the difference between animals, they say, is that we cannot make our own food. We can't live on light. This is what scientists say. We cannot photosynthesize, so we have to consume things. But you guys know there's an animal that can photosynthesize. It's a sea slug that lives near Canada. It's a Canadian sea slug. Can freaking photosynthesize. Scientists are wrong. And in a lot of the yogi literature in India, do you guys know what else those crazy yogis can do?
Not eat.
Not eat. There's one of my favorite stories is the story of Milarepa. Milarepa, towards the end of his life, began eating only nettles. Nettles, those crazy guys that sting you that I was talking about before, you know? That somehow know to make a poison that'll mess you up. Right? So not only do they know stuff, they can know stuff and be mean too. Not only do they have consciousness of other things, but they know how to mess with other things. So that's like an evolved kind of consciousness, right? You can mess with other people. So he began eating only nettles, and then his skin, according to the legends, turned a little green, and he stopped eating altogether because his body began photosynthesizing. He would have to, sit in the daylight and go outside of his little cave, but he in fact evolved his body to a point where he could photosynthesize. Right? What do you guys think about that? Pretty crazy. Sea slugs figured it out. Yeah, totally. It's a story that's floating around, right? Go ahead, guys, sit down. And so, if you go into the kind of history of animals and how we formed, you guys know like the first animals that started emerging were like these single cell protozoa type of guys, right? Everyone's kind of familiar with that. What about like the big animals? The first one that they kind of came across was a jellyfish. So far the scientists have figured out this was the first animal that ever formed, was a jellyfish, right? Which is invisible. So cool. The first animal they ever made was a jellyfish that you couldn't see. Invisible animal was the first thing. And then they think like the next thing that came was the sponge. You guys know sponges? They're like, is that a plant? It's kind of planty, but it doesn't photosynthesize. So it's kind of like the sea slug where it's in between. It can kind of like, it's a plant that eats things. And that's the other thing. Okay, again, scientists are so frustrating. Some plants eat stuff. They don't just photosynthesize. There's plants that eat bugs. Right? So how can you make a delineation? There's some plants that eat people, like in the jungle. You guys know like those big plants, and they have the pictures of like the people's feet sticking out of them, you know?
Like shopping quarters.
Yeah, totally. So plants can eat people. People aren't the only ones that eat plants, right? Plants can eat you too. It's true. And fungus can eat you too. Fungus can eat you alive from the inside out. Bacteria can eat you alive from the inside out. Right? It's all just this big mess of different stuff that eats each other, and then eventually somewhere it eats light. Right? It's kind of about like light eaters and all this stuff that just eats each other. That's pretty much what, that's my definition of life. Okay? You got light, and then you got a bunch of stuff that eats each other. Yeah?
You also don't need light.
Right. Well, dark is where everything comes from, including light. So,
Sulfur bacteria.
right. There's things that live with no light. Yeah, bottom of a volcano, sulfur bacteria. You don't need to have that stuff. You just need to have something to eat, right? And so, now that your brain is fixed a little bit, we're going to think about trees. Trees are so rad, right? So when you think about plants and kind of plant magic and people that communicate with plants, some of the biggies throughout all of the ancient cultures are trees. They're like the big mojo plants, right? If you look into every creation story, you're going to see this thing called a tree of life. And they have them everywhere. It's Yggdrasil, right? It's the tree of life in the Bible, which there's a tree of life and the tree of good and evil. Some people think they're two different guys, but some people think they're the same one, right? Tree of life gives Adam and Eve the fruit, and then they have sex and everything's all over, right? I guess that's why it's the tree of life. But every single tradition and culture, look in shamanism, all the like, even Siberian cultures where there's hardly any trees, will have this concept of a tree of life, that's where human beings come from. That we come from trees. I'm going to say that again. That we come from trees. I know everybody thinks of like the tree of life and Adam and Eve, and they think about like it's a life giver because they like eat the fruit. But if you guys can like take that to a meta level and some of the symbolism in the other ones, it's actually like showing that they come from the tree. They always show two people on either side, and there's a big tree in the middle. Right? I know this is crazy. Okay? But that those creation stories always have a tree in them for a reason. Right? It's like an origin source. And this, all of those stories of the trees and kind of where we come from, I think it holds a pretty big secret of like how we can access parts of us and why we can communicate with plants so well. How we can like talk to them and why they connect to our neurotransmitters. Why? There's some kind of connection, right? Some conscious connection between us and the tree. If you look in Egypt, it's the sycamore tree. Odin has the ash tree. There's always like some kind of tree hanging out in there. The Druids, right? Druids is the oak tree. And you guys know what magic wands were? This is really good too.
Hollywood. Grow on, right?
Hollywood is one that became very popular, which I always love because Hollywood is like the land of illusion, right? Like it's a magic wand that they wave over everybody. But the Druids would take a branch, actually not from the oak tree, but from the ash tree.
Is it called a wand?
It was called a wand, and it was a little branch, and it was basically, you would hold the branch so you would have a little tree. It was just a microcosm tree that you would hold in your hand. The wand wasn't like, didn't have magical properties. It was the freaking tree that had the magical properties. And the reason you have the wand is to hold the tree power in your hand. That's what else do you guys see the wizards with? A staff. What's the staff made out of? It's a tree. You guys like Lord of the Rings? Of course you do. So good. All the wizards have their staff, and that's where their power is, right? What's their staffs made out of? Trees. So the tree was used by the magicians to channel. They would just use the tree magic. You guys know Harry Potter, right? Yeah, everybody knows Harry Potter. All the different wands are made out of different kinds of trees, right? And they'll have like other stuff in them, like a unicorn, a horn, or whatever. But the most sought after wand, what is it, the elder wand? The elder, it's made out of elder. Isn't that the one that Baltimore has? Come on, dorks, don't be shy. Right? So it's made out of a specific kind of tree that's very magical, and that's where the power of the wand comes from the darn tree that they made the wand from. Not like people think like a magic wand, it's you that has magic, or the universe, or whatever. They're using the tree magic, right? And you're communicating with that tree magic. And it's always fascinating to me that there's such a clear distinction between animals and plants. You know, like everyone is like, oh, that's an animal, that's a plant. Well, sea slug is what I would say, first of all. Second of all, whenever we think of like magical, witchy stuff, we always think of like the shapeshifter, right? That people can shapeshift into like werewolves or vampires or stuff like that. But we forget there's also a lot of very famous plant shapeshifters where people turn into plants. You can shapeshift not just into a wolf, but into plants, right? There's in Ovid's Metamorphosis, the nymph that's getting chased around by the fawn that wants to have sex with her. That's how it always goes. Laurel shifts into the laurel tree in order to get away from him, right? She changes the shape of her body into a tree. And there's so many stories in folklore of people changing and morphing into plants, right? You just kind of do a little switcheroo. Narcissus. Narcissus gets turned into a flower, right? People can turn into flowers too. And I know, like, when we talked in the Shapeshifter lecture, kind of how that might happen by accessing one of my favorite words, which is atavism. You guys know atavism? Atavism it literally means your great-grandfather's great-grandfather. And an atavism is what happens, like, when a dolphin shows up with hind legs, right? Or a person is born with a tail. Christians love that. When people are born with tails, they get so happy. Right? How do you explain that, Mr. Christian? Where did that tail come from? Oh, it must be a demon possessing you. It's Satan's tail. No, it's a monkey tail. It's an atavism. An atavism is when a gene that is in your body gets switched on. Something in your DNA that had been like asleep maybe for generations and generations gets turned on, and then that old archaic thing that maybe somewhere in your past existed gets re-expressed, right? You guys have seen like people with horns? Those are some of my favorite ones too. Have you guys seen those pictures?
Yes.
Some of them they can like kind of explain through like weird skin stuff, but some of them are like retarded. It's like a full-on horn growing out of their head. Right? Have you guys seen that tree guy? Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about? Where he started growing like wood out of him?
It was a fungus, wasn't it?
It's like a wood. They couldn't explain exactly what it was. They said it was like fungusy, right? Just started growing out of him. Do you guys know that do you guys know what they're doing? They figured out with some plants. If you switch on a gene in a plant, you guys know what'll happen? It can turn into wood. There's a gene in a plant where it can turn into a tree. So you can have like a pansy. I don't know why I chose pansy. That's funny. And there's a genetic code in there you can access and turn it on, and it'll start making wood, like a tree, right? And we, in ourselves, like we can figure like, oh, we have all this DNA going back, and people can kind of figure out, well, I must have DNA going back all the way to like protozoa, or you can kind of like wrap your brain around that. What if you also have plant stuff in there? There's plant stuff in there too, right? How do you think that Milarepa turned on his, do you think he like grew photosynthesis? Think he like made it out of nothing? And he was just like photosynthesizing all the time? Or do you think the ability to photosynthesize was latent within his body the entire time?
Yes.
Yes. That it was inside the whole time, and then a switch flipped because he figured out how to turn the key, and then he was like, oh, now I can do this now. Because it's all in your body, right? So if there's some kind of thing you can turn on that would turn on your plant stuff, right? He did it by eating a plant. Do you guys think by eating plants it turns stuff on?
Yes.
How much stuff can a plant turn on in your body?
Lots.
It can make you die, it can make you poop, it can make you puke, it can make you sweat, it can make you cry, it can make you like, it can make your throat close, it can make you like aphrodisiac, it can make you give birth, it can make you Viagra, right? A plant can make your body do almost anything. Plants can totally control any function in your body that your brain can. I'm just going to say that again so you understand. Plants can control anything your body can do. That's how medicine works from herbs. Do you guys know why you get a physiological response when you ingest a plant? That's a good question. Why does your body have a physiological response to a plant? Does anybody have an idea?
The chemical has a receptor.
A chemical, okay, so people say chemical and receptor, but do you guys know what that means? That means there's an already existing little, like, hugging spot. And then the plant goes like, oh, because there's already this thing that's like, I love plants. And then the plant comes in and it's like, click. So it turns it on because you already have the plant thing inside your body. Already inside of you, waiting for the plant to come. That's why it elicits a response. It turns the thing on, and then it goes. It's not like, okay, if you eat DMT, I know I'm just using that for an example. Do you think what happens is you eat it, and then your body goes, oh, what do we do with this? We better figure something out. We'll just make this crazy thing happen. You guys think that ever is true of anything? No. It already has a whole way of dealing with it. It has a thing just to deal with that thing.
Well, we naturally create it too.
We make it in us.
Yeah.
But how many people do you know that make or consume DMT? Not a majority of the population. There are many, many, unfortunately maybe, there are many, many people who will never consume DMT in their entire lives, and yet their body has a receptacle for it. There are people that live in parts of the world where the DMT-containing plant would never, ever, ever grow. What? There's people that live in parts of the world where there's no DMT plants that grow, but there is still that thing in their body. How do we have receptors for plants that are in the Amazon jungle? I'm Scandinavian. My people, my people, sounded so stupid. I don't have people, but my people would have never gone anywhere near a jungle, right? We would have gotten stung by nettles and bugs and we'd hate it. So why in my body are there receptors for these plants that grow in the Amazon jungle? Can you explain that to me?
Your ancestors.
Evolution? Right. There's already in there because there's a place before the place that you came from. It goes before your ancestors in the jungle. I'm just going to say something to you guys right now. The receptors for those crazy plants in your body come from the plant that you came from, which is the same plant that's making the chemicals. It comes not from your ancestors in the jungle, but it comes from your ancestor that is a plant. From your ancestor that is a plant. Right? I know. It's so good. Right? Plants are part of your ancestors on the planet Earth. Right? You can take it back further. We don't have to stop at plants. You can keep going all the way to stars if you want to. But since this lecture is on plants, we'll just keep your minds relatively intact before we shoot off into outer space. But the good thing is you can take the plants and shoot off into outer space.
Yeah.
Right? So good. So this idea, this concept that we have plants as an ancestor, I get so mad about this stuff, and then again it goes back to scientists again. Okay, so there was a guy that had figured this out. I mean, lots of shamans, people know this, they just forget. And it's in all the stories, it's in all the symbols, they have the darn tree there with us. People just don't want to think they come from monkeys, much less trees, so they can't quite like make their brains that big. Stories everywhere, but we're just not paying attention, right? So the thing of it is that this was presented to the scientific community in the 1800s by a very famous man, but was still poo-poo. The man was Goethe, or Goethe, as I thought he was called until my German friend told me how to pronounce his name. His name is Goethe because he's German. Have you guys heard of Goethe? A lot of people know him because he wrote the very famous, beautiful, heart-piercing story of Faust. Faust is very good. If you've never read it, you should check it out. It's written very archaically, but beautifully poetic. Goethe became very famous in Germany and was known as Germany's most famous poet for a while. But do you guys know what Goethe did when he wasn't writing Faust? Studying plants! Goethe first studied light, and he developed an entire system of color and light theory, which is totally amazing. If any of you nerds are into like color and light theory, if you look at Goethe's stuff, it's totally groundbreaking and totally true. And it took like hundreds of years for people to like figure it out after he had already like very meticulously written it down and had little drawings and used watercolor paints and made paintings of all this stuff. It's so stupid how people don't pay attention. He presented it to the scientific community, and they said, "You're a poet. You're not a scientist. You don't have a degree. Or get out of here. Your poetry's cute. We like you, but totally not going to pay attention to any of this stuff." So after he was studying light, you know what he figured out? He figured out plants and light and their relationship, right? And then what he figured out was all plants, he would look at a plant, and the whole plant, he would say, is just the leaf repeated over and over, right? Every plant can be broken down into a single shape, which is the shape of the leaf, and then it's repeated, like a fractal. So it has like a hologram. This German dude, just by looking at light all day, figured out holograms in plants. And then what he figured out is that every plant was the same plant. But I know, every plant is the same plant, but with different arrangements of the pattern, making a different expression, different frequency, right? So each plant is only the same plant with different keys turned on. You turn on like key 2 and 3, now you got blackberry bush. You turn on key 4, 5, 6, now you have a walnut tree, right? But it's all the same plant, just different keys turned. Now, what Goethe didn't figure out, which is also true, is that that's actually the primer material, right? The truth is, there's the same thing for everything, not just plants, people, universe, right? We're all just different key combinations of a single leaf that's rearranged in different patterns. Everything, right? But Mr. Goethe just figured that out for plants, and he published his material, and this was before Charles Darwin had his theory of evolution. This was before they had like figured out this evolution thing. Goethe was like, this is what's happening. These are all only the same thing in different combinations. And then Darwin comes along and he jacks the whole thing up and he says, these are all different things. And then we get scientific separation is what happens then. Now everything's different. Everything goes into a category. This is a plant, and this is a fungus, and this is a monkey, and this is a person. So not true. The truth is we're all just leaves in different arrangements, right? That's the truth. In different patterns and different frequencies. So, how does a shaman or a person or anybody, how do you communicate with a plant and do magic? How do you do plant magic? Right? How many of you guys have ever done plant magic? So there's a couple ways that you can do it. The easy way is you do correspondence, right? There's a lot of folks that have figured out these correspondences by doing crazy stuff hundreds of years ago, so you guys can be lazy and get a book. So you can do planet correspondence, right? Like if you get the Culpeper herbal, Nicholas Culpeper, he's given all these plants planetary affiliation. So you want to do a Saturn spell, right? You go in your little handy dandy Culpeper herbal and you find the Saturn plants, right? You get your little Solomon seal and then you kick off your little Saturn spell. You want to make a fetish, a Saturn fetish, so cinchy, you just go get your little Saturn plant. Now you have a spell. So easy, right? If you want to do more complicated plant magic, where you actually do the work, and you're not lazy, back in the day, you guys know what they would do? This is so good. Stop eating. You stop eating. Like what? Like a plant doesn't eat. You fast. My African shaman friend told his grandfather was one of the most famous herbalists in his country, which is Ghana. And he told me what he would do. You guys know what he would do? He wouldn't eat or drink any water. He wouldn't drink water either. Not recommended to try at home. For 5 days. No water for 5 days. And then he would walk out into the African bush. Okay, it's Africa, so it's probably hot. So he has no food and no water, and then he goes out into the bush. And then he goes and he talks to the plants. And the plants talk back. Right? So through sympathy, you can start the communication. What is another way to sympathetically communicate with a plant? You eat nothing but that plant, right? The Taoists would do this a lot. They want to invoke magic of like Fuling, okay? They want to do Fuling. So Fuling, they're going to eat only Fuling, and that's it. So now their frequency, the tissue in their body, same frequency as Fuling. That's it. You want to get crazy and have a conversation with spinach? Eat only spinach for like a week. How many of you guys have ever done a crazy juice fast? Where you only drank like the juice of one thing, or was it like a few things? Have you guys ever done like a just like carrot juice fast? It gets really weird. It gets really weird. I can tell you it's weird. If you practice sympathy by putting your frequency as the same frequency of the plant, then you can open a dialogue. What do you think happens when you ingest hallucinogenic plants? What do you guys think happens? You're talking to the plants inside of your body. We always think of communication, which is so stupid, as an exterior event, right? It's like our words go like this, and we're talking, we're communicating. That's why scientists are so dumb when they say animals don't communicate, because they can't see them talking to each other. What do you think happens when you talk to each other? Little waves go in and out of our ears, they penetrate. They have to get inside of your body, okay? Sound waves go like, blah, and then they go inside of you, and then they kind of like, go like this, and then you're like, oh, this is what's happening, that's what they're saying, and then you make some go back and penetrate them. Now you're talking, communicating. And then they say that plants don't communicate. Well, there was a rad study it happens in so many different plants, but there was this rad old hippie guy that was studying sagebrush plants in California, and he would find out that when a bunch of when the grasshopper population would get like out of control, they'd start eating these sage plants. Those sage plants would say, "Look out, you guys! There's grasshoppers coming!" And they would warn the other sage plants there was grasshoppers eating them. They'd be like, "Hey, something's eating me! You guys gotta do something!" So the other sagebrush plants volatile chemical. As a result of the sagebrush plant that was getting eaten, communicating, saying, hey, there's grasshoppers, gotta do something, right? Communication. Communication. Just like bugs do it too, chemical communication, light communication, sound communication. So I always like to think of this. I don't know if anyone's tried this yet. I should try this. Can you communicate with the Salvia divinorum plant without ingesting it? Has anybody tried that? What if you do that? Why do you have to eat it to communicate with it? It's kind of shitty, really. You're going to try and talk to this plant so you eat it? I mean, the plant probably wants us to, otherwise they wouldn't make the stuff for the little, right? It's nice. The plant likes it. We have to eat it. You take it, and now, well, it lives in you now, because it's in your tissue. It's just got reincarnated into your body, right? Into your flesh. But what if you try to communicate with an hallucinogenic plant without ingesting it? That scientifically should be very possible. You guys know why? The chemicals in the plant that make you freak out, you guys know what those are? Neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters. You guys know what makes your brain talk to you? Neurotransmitters. The reason I can sit up here and talk to you is because that stuff's like flapping around in my brain somewhere, going like all gooey, and then I can make words come out of my mouth. If a plant contains the same neurotransmitters we have in our brain, there should be no reason why we can't communicate with it. Obviously, there's a language barrier, right? I think that's a big reason why people have trouble communicating with animals. But all you have to do is pay attention to your cat for a little while, and you figure out its language, right? If you hang out with your cat for like 4 hours straight, you know when it has to pee or it's hungry or whatever. You just know because you're talking to it. How many of you guys talk to your cats? Do you really think you can't talk to plants the same way you talk to your cats? Why not? Right? What's the difference? They all have neurotransmitters. They all have neurotransmitters. So that kind of chemical communication can happen between your brain without even like ingesting it. Right? Do I have to eat your brains to know what you think? Maybe that's a good idea. That's how zombies happen. Zombies. So you can do it that way, but I don't know that it's absolutely necessary. Just like it's not necessary to eat, right? Same thing. Why, if you can fast and talk to the plant, you can eat the plant and talk to it, or you can fast and talk to it. You don't have to eat it. You cannot eat yourself. Sacrifice. Right? Now I get into sacrifice. Okay. Sacrificial element to plant communication is harder work. It's easy to just eat something. Right? You can go down the corner and probably get some. But what if you can, through sympathy, make yourself be able to do that on your own? What if you can go in, you can access your DMT plant ancestor within your body? You don't have to eat a DMT plant. You know why? Because all plants are the same plant, the same leaf, just different arrangements. And that singular archetype of plant is in you, so you can turn on any one you want. You want to turn on your carrot? Turn on your carrot. You don't need to ingest anything. Right? That's how the yogis do not eat. Right? It's work, though. You can't just stop eating and drinking or you're in trouble. There's all this stuff you have to do to get ready to not eat and not drink. There's all these keys that you got to turn inside of yourself so you can get to that point where you can do that thing, right? Or you can ingest the plants to help you turn the keys to get yourself ready to do the thing. But the plants are not necessary because you contain them all within yourself, right? The wand is not necessary because you have the tree inside of you. Right? This is where those old sorcerer dudes are not quite on top of it. You don't need the wand. Because if you understand that you are the tree, then you got tree power, and that tree power is coming from inside of you, not outside of you, right? You get poison. Poison is a really good example. You guys know, do you guys think that like every cure is good for everybody? Some people will take some medicine, some people take Viagra, and that's it, kaput. Right? Their little Viagra receptor is like, no, don't like that. Most people's Viagra receptor is like, oh, thank you. But not everybody, right? Depends on what keys you got turned on. What plants have you eaten your whole life? Let's say you don't eat any plants. All you eat is meat. You're going to have a way different reaction if someone gives you salvia divinorum than someone that eats plants all the time, all day. Why do you think people have like freak attacks when they eat some plants or take some medicine? Some people have a horrible visceral reaction to some medicine. Right? Why is that? One man's meat is another man's poison.
What about placebo?
Placebos too. If your mind is attuned, you don't need anything. The placebo is like, you don't need to ingest any medicine. You just turn on the aspirin part in your body. Now you got painkiller. Right? Switch on your aspirin key. Your willow tree. Maybe cry a little. Turn on your willow tree. Crying usually helps pain. It's funny that the weeping willow helps your pain. Right? And you cry when you feel pain. I don't know. But ideally, if you're going to like try and attune to something, you just take the work, concentrate, put yourself on that frequency, and that's how you do like the real plant magic, I think. I mean, you can use plants. They're all over the place. You know. Simple. I still eat, so I haven't stopped eating. But you can also turn stuff on inside of you, right? And get it activated through concentration, through getting in on that vibe, right? And so if you're going to think about what plants are and what plant magic is, you have to understand that plant magic works through, all magic works through sympathy. Sympathy is the mechanism. Sympathy is the mechanism for magic. Magic is opening your perception to see more of reality. That happens through sympathy. Right? So the reason plant magic works is because we are plants. We have plant stuff hidden and contained within ourselves. Inside of your cells is planty stuff. That's why it works. Not because the plants have some kind of crazy thing inside of them that's not in you, it's in you too. That's how plant magic goes. So that's what I have for today. Thanks for coming.